Hi everyone, this is the commentary for Ezra Vision 1 of 7. This is going to be part of a contextual prophet series, a deep dive into the men who became prophets by studying their words and prophecies for our day in context. We're going to be starting with Ezra and eventually moving into Daniel, John the Revelator, anybody who prophesied of our day and seeing their prophecies in context. So why Esdras? I started hearing about Ezra's eagle all over the place in regards to the United States and its future. Then a statement from James Proust caught my attention. In regards to the latter-day prophecies, he said, what I was reading was very little amounts of scripture. Less than 20% of our LDS prophecy books have scripture, and the ones that do have little chunks and pieces. A little bit of Daniel, a little bit of the book of Revelation, a little bit of Ezekiel. They didn't actually take everything that's in the whole section of prophecy and digest it so that it's understandable. So I decided that I wanted to read Esdras, in its fullness and digest it. What I found was amazing, and that's why I want to present it in the same way here. A wise man once told me that if I wanted to find out the meaning behind a story or a parable, that I must first find the question that drew it out, meaning that parables are given as responses to questions and doubts. They are custom tailored to the person receiving them, and therefore, in order to understand their application and meaning, often containing symbolism, we must first comprehend their context. So let's talk about my source material for this whole presentation. There's a link here, and I'll put it in the description below as well, to the King James Bible online /apocryphal-books. First Esdras is basically a repeat of Second Chronicles and will not be treated in this video, but Second Esdras is what we're kind of focused on here. It's sometimes referred to as 4 Esdras, and it contains 16 chapters. But 4 of those are highly debated as original, the first 2 and the last 2. Therefore, we will only be taking a look into chapters 3 through 14, which are generally considered original works of Ezra. No verses have been added or omitted in these slides. These are apocryphal works, so great care must be taken to read and learn by the Spirit, because interpolations of men may be scattered throughout the text. Sometimes throughout my presentations, I'm going to be giving modern vernacular translations. Those are solely my opinion as to what was meant by the ancient text. I encourage you to interpret through the Spirit for yourself, because any commentary is also not of any official church position and should be taken with a grain of salt. We're just doing our best here. We're all mortal. We all have our own interpretations of some of these things. But I think it's so important to take the entire book, the life of the prophet, seeing them in a like through a wide angle lens before we dive in and look at just one little piece of a prophecy. So here's Ezra at a glance. He's also known as Ezra the scribe and Ezra the priest. He's a descendant of Sariah, the last high priest to serve in Solomon's temple before it was destroyed by the Babylonians. He's a close relative of Joshua, the first high priest. He dictates 204 books, if not more. 20 are for the public, 70 are for the wise alone. Together with Esther, he's around that same time, they work with the king, Artaxerxes, to help the captives return to Jerusalem from Babylon. Now, did they work like hand in hand? We don't know, but they're at the exact same time frame working with Artaxerxes. So together with Nehemiah, he takes the first group back to Jerusalem. He reintroduces the observance of Torah, law, at Jerusalem. He becomes the first scribe and sets a foundation for the class of scribes that endure throughout Christ's ministry. So for example, the time of Christ, we have Sadducees, Pharisees, and scribes. The scribes came directly from Ezra. There wasn't scribes before then, and Ezra was the first, and it continued onward. And we'll see that throughout different parts of his life. It's believed that he was translated, like Enoch and Elijah, up into heaven after his mortal ministry. So let's take a look at the dispensation of Moses as a whole. So there's a couple different slides. Here's one of a map, and then we're going to look at some timelines. Here's, before we kind of dive into it, I want to explain the key over here on the left-hand side. So the current dispensation that we are in is indicated by the top band of color on each slide, and that's what I'm going to be using throughout all of these presentations on the Contextual Prophet series. So we are in Moses' dispensation, and it's going to be that kind of aqua blue color. Down below, there are two different bands of timelines. The top of the bottom is the dispensational timeline, and it's listed by their head prophet. So Adam, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Moses, John the Baptist, and Joseph. So John the Baptist obviously can be represented by Christ. Sometimes he's represented by Peter. Sometimes it's all of the apostles. That one's kind of an interesting one, but just know that I abbreviate it with John, but it can contain various things. And then below that is the 7 seal timeline, as referenced in the book of Revelation, that there are 7 seals, and those very much hit on 1,000-year marks exactly. So, anytime that we are looking at any given story, I'm putting a red dot in the middle of both of those bottom timelines to give you an idea where we're at in the dispensational timeline and on the 7 seal timeline as well. All right, so Esdras, we are looking at the map here of the whole dispensation of Moses. He brings the children of Israel out of bondage, out of slavery, out of Egypt. They wander in the wilderness and go up into the land of Canaan, which is modern day Israel, Palestine, that whole vicinity. And then is set up the kingdom, David, Solomon, Saul, and the northern tribes separate from the southern tribes, and then we know that they are taken captive. The northern tribes are taken captive by Assyria. The southern tribes are eventually taken captive by Babylon. And so they go over to what is modern-day Iraq. And that is where Ezra and Daniel, Esther, Nehemiah, Zechariah, many different prophets are over there in the Babylonian captivity. And then they eventually, with the help of Ezra and Nehemiah, are brought back into the land of Israel, into the promised land. And so we're going to see mainly that second red and blue line on the map throughout Ezra's story. So Ezra is what we have in the Hebrew Bible. Esdras is his name in the apocryphal Greek form of his name. Now moving on to the dispensation of Moses as a timeline. Here we see all the way from Moses' Exodus all the way until Christ's ministry. So every time that there's a low point in their history, it's signified by that dip. And every time that there's a high point or blessings, covenantal relationship with God being honored, that's represented by an uptake in the wave there. So around 1310 BC, we have the Exodus from Egypt, and then the children of Israel then have an upswing where Saul, David, Solomon, they build up the kingdom. They set up a good system. David begins the temple, Solomon completes the temple, and we having that in about 1021 BC. Then the children of Israel never get along, obviously, and so 931, the kingdoms divide. So the northern tribes, there's 10 of those, and then 2 of the southern tribes, they're a divided kingdom. The upper 10 are called Israel, and the bottom 2 are called Judah. And then we have the Assyrian captivity, and then Babylonian captivity. As represented on this timeline, we're focusing on the Babylonian captivity because that's the one that applies to Esdras. And then with Esdras and Nehemiah's help, they return from Babylon in 538 BC. After that, let's take a step back. So while in captivity, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that's interpreted by the prophet Daniel, which is the famous Nebuchadnezzar dream of the image of this tall man, idol, statue, whatever you want to call it, that has a gold head, a silver breastplate, the bronze skirting, and then the iron and clay feet, which signify the rulers that are going to be taking over Israel. Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold, and so forth. So, as when they return from Babylon, as prophesied, the Greeks come in and conquer next. Alexander the Great pretty much takes over the Persian Empire, which took over the Babylonian Empire. So anyway, we have the Greeks, and they are conquering at about 332 BC. Now, obviously, the children of Israel don't stand for some of the crazy things that they're put through under Greek captivity, and so we have the family of Judas Maccabeus that revolts, and so we have the time frame around 164 where the Maccabean revolts are pushed through, and that's where we get the word macabre, meaning very dark and twisted. The revolts take a crazy turn for the tribes of Judah. But then we have Pompey and the Roman conquest in 63 BC, and the Roman conquest, they set up Herod. Herod is kind of the ruler of the area and rebuilds the temple, and as we know that's when Christ is born, and that part of the story continues onward. So the Dispensation of Moses, that's it at a glance from 1310 BC to Christ's birth and ministry. And Ezra is just past the halfway point in the Dispensation of Moses. All right, now finally diving into the book of Esdras. So in 2nd Esdras, he has 7 different visions. Now the visions are very different. The first 3 are question and answer sessions with an angel named Uriel. These are very much like a face-to-face. He might have been in a transfigured position. We don't know, but they're with an angel. They're not dreams. He calls it trances. And then visions 4 through 6 are actually dreams that he's having that an angel then comes and interprets it for him. Then the 7th vision is the Lord himself giving Ezra a mission to perform. So let's dive in. This first vision, I'm going to go through very much interpreting and putting a modern spin on what is being said. If you want just the words and don't want my commentary at all, that's totally fine. I have other videos which are called the reading of the text, and go and watch those ones. It's just a straight through version without any commentary of what is being said in the visions. So here I'm going to be kind of extracting, reinterpreting for a modern audience, kind of the gist of what's being said. But in no way is this a representation of what actually might be inferred by these verses. You take your own thoughts and prayers and focus in on this with the Spirit. So let's dive into the first vision. He begins, in the 30th year, which would be 567 BC, after the ruin of the city, which was 587 BC, I was in Babylon, and lay troubled upon my bed, and my thoughts came up over my heart. For I saw the desolation of Zion, and the wealth of them that dwelt at Babylon, and my spirit was sore moved, so that I began to speak words full of fear to the Most High, and said, O Lord, who bearest rule, thou spakest at the beginning, when thou didst plant the earth, and that thyself alone, and commandedst the people, and gavest a body unto Adam without soul, which was the workmanship of thine hands, and didst breathe into him the breath of life, and he was made living before thee. And thou leadest him into paradise, which his right hand hath planted, before ever the earth came forward. And unto him thou gavest commandment to love thy way, which he transgressed. And immediately thou appointedst death in him and his generations, of whom came nations, tribes, peoples, and kindreds out of number. And every people walked after their own will, and did wonderful things before thee, and despised thy commandments. And again, in process of time, thou broughtest the flood upon those that dwelt in the world, and destroyedst them. And it came to pass in every of them, that as death was to Adam, so was the flood to these. Nevertheless, of them thou leftest, namely Noah, with his household, of whom came all righteous men. And it happened, that when they dwelt upon the earth, began to multiply, and had gotten them many children, and were a great people, they began again to be more ungodly than the first. Now when they lived so wickedly before thee, thou didst choose thee a man from among them, whose name was Abraham. Him thou lovest, and unto him only thou showedst thy will, and madest an everlasting covenant with him, promising him that thou wouldst never forsake his seed. And unto him thou gavest Isaac, and unto Isaac thou gavest Jacob and Esau. As for Jacob, thou didst choose him to thee, and put by Esau, and so Jacob became a great multitude. And it came to pass, that when thou leadest his seed out of Egypt, thou broughtest them up into Mount Sinai, and bowing the heavens, thou didst set fast the earth, movest the whole world, and madest the depths to tremble, and tremblest the men of that age. And thy glory went through 4 gates of fire, and of earthquake, and of wind, of cold. And thou mightest give the law unto the seed of Jacob, and diligence unto the generation of Israel. And yet tookest thou not away from them a wicked heart, that thy law might bring forth fruit in them. For the first Adam, being a wicked heart, transgressed, and was overcome, and so be all they that are born of him. Thus infirmity was made permanent, and the law also in the heart of all the people, with the malignity of the root, so that the good departed away, and the evil abode still. So the times passed away, and the years were brought to an end. Thou didst raise thee up a servant called David, whom thou commandedst to build a city unto thy name, and to offer incense and oblations unto thee therein. When this was done many years, then they that inhabited the city forsook thee, and in all things did even as Adam and all his generations had done. For they also had a wicked heart, and so thou gavest thy city over into the hands of thine enemies. All right, just one quick note on this one. So to offer incense and oblations, the incense and oblations are 2 different things, and they can be likened to our sacraments and our temple worship, respectively. And their deeds then any better than inherit Babylon, that they should therefore have the dominion over Zion? For when I came thither, and had seen impieties without number, then my soul saw many evildoers in this 30th year, so that my heart failed me. For I have seen how thou sufferest them sinning, and hast spared wicked doers, and hast destroyed thy people, and hast preserved thine enemies, and hast not signified it. I do not remember how this way may be left. Are they then of Babylon better than they of Zion? Or is there any people that knoweth thee besides Israel? Or what generation hath so believed thy covenants as Jacob? And yet their reward appeareth not, and their labor hath no fruit. For I have gone here and there through the heathen, and I see they flow in wealth, and think not upon thy commandments. Weigh thou, therefore, our wickedness now in the balance, and theirs also that dwell in the world, and so shall thy name nowhere be found but in Israel. Or when was it that they which dwell upon the earth have not sinned in thy sight? Or what people have so kept thy commandments? Thou shalt find that Israel by name hath kept thy precepts, but not the heathen. So here we have Esdras' questions, kind of a summary. What would you say is his biggest thing that he's not understanding, that he's just not getting? He's obviously wondering why they are in bondage and that their captors are just prospering over and over again. But why is that so? Why does God punish the righteous and allow the wicked to prosper? That's quite the conundrum that Ezra and us have all along the way. Then in steps Uriel. Uriel is sent to him to expound and teach him, grow him. He's very much not to his full stature of prophet yet, and so Uriel is come to help get him there. And you'll find this very fun as it goes through the growth that Esdras makes. And here's where my interpretations will kind of come to play. Just for this first vision, I'm going to read the actual text and then my interpretation afterward. In subsequent visions, I'll probably just kind of read what my interpretation is and then leave you to go and interpret it for yourselves. And the angel that was sent unto me, whose name was Uriel, gave me an answer, and said, Thy heart hath gone too far in this world, and thinkest thou to comprehend the way of the Most High? He's basically saying, Ezra, you're thinking too complex. You're trying to comprehend God and his ways without fully understanding the world that you live in and the world that's around you. Now, Uriel, that's the main question that gets brought up. Who is Uriel? I'll explain this a little bit more in depth after the whole vision takes place so that we can kind of see him in a better context, get familiar with him before we interpret who he is. I believe it's Moses, but I could be wrong. That is my opinion, and I want to make that perfectly clear. All right, moving on. Then said I, Yea, my Lord. And he answered me and said, I am sent to show thee 3 ways, and to set forth 3 similitudes before thee, whereof, if thou canst declare me one, I will show thee also the way that thou desirest to see, and I shall show thee from whence the wicked heart cometh. So he's saying, I'm sent from God to give you 3 metaphors, 3 similitudes. If you can correctly discern even one of them, then I'll be able to show you where your heart has gone wrong and what you desire to actually see. And I said, Tell on, my Lord. Then said he unto me, Go thy way, weigh me the weight of fire, or measure me the blast of wind, or call me again the day that is past. So he's saying, Tell me, how much does fire weigh? How fast is the wind blowing? And how can you make a day repeat itself? Kind of like Groundhog Day. Then answered I and said, What man is able to do that thou shouldest ask such things of me? And he said unto me, If I should ask thee how great dwellings are in the midst of the sea, or how many springs are in the beginning of the deep, or how many springs are above the firmament, or which are the outgoings of paradise, peradventure thou wouldst say unto me, I never went down into the deep, nor as yet into hell, neither did I ever climb into heaven. Nevertheless, now have I asked thee, but only of fire and wind, and of the day wherethrough thou hast passed, and of things from which thou canst not be separated. And yet canst thou give me no answer of them? He said moreover unto me, Thine own things, and such as are grown up with thee, canst thou not know. How should thy vessel then be able to comprehend the way of the highest, and the world being now outwardly corrupted, to understand the corruption that is evident in my sight? So he's saying, if I would ask you questions outside of your realm, such as how many dwellings are in the sea, or how many springs are in the earth or above the earth, or what comes out of heaven, you would reply that you clearly, they're not in your realm of understanding, therefore you have no experience to answer them. So when I ask you about fire, wind, and time, which you do have experience with, why is it that you can't answer my questions? There are many things that you've grown up with that are still beyond your comprehension. How can you possibly expect to comprehend God's ways, such as worldly corruption? Then said I unto him, It were better that we were not at all, that we should live still in wickedness and to suffer and not know wherefore. So Esdras is replying, Well, if that's the case, what's the point of even being born and forced to suffer if we don't even know why we're suffering? He answered me and said, I went into a forest, into a plain, and the trees took counsel, and said, Come, let us go make war against the sea, that it may depart away before us, that we may make us more woods. The floods and the sea also in like manner took counsel, and said, Come, let us go up and subdue the woods of the plain, that there also we may make us another country. The thought of the wood was in vain, for the fire came and consumed it. And the thoughts of the floods of the seas came likewise to naught, for the sand stood up and stopped them. If thou wert judged now betwixt these two, whom wouldst thou begin to justify, and whom wouldst thou condemn? So Uriel is giving a new metaphor, and he's saying, So I went into the clearing in the forest, and found the trees talking and counseling one with another. And they said, Come, let us go make war against the sea, so that it will retreat further back, and then we'll have more land to expand our great forest. And the waters likewise said, Let's go kill the forest pretty much, so that we can have more room for our waters. The fire came and consumed the wood, and likewise the sand stopped the sea from expanding. So, if you were to judge between these two, who's in the right and who's in the wrong? I answered and said, Verily it is a foolish thought that they both have devised. For the ground is given unto the wood, and the sea hath her place to bear his floods. So obviously they're both in the wrong, because they already have their space allowed to them. They shouldn't go beyond their bounds. Then answered he me and said, Thou hast given a right judgment, but why judgest thou not thyself also? For like as the ground is given unto the wood, and the sea to his floods, even so they that dwell upon the earth may understand nothing but that which is upon the earth, and he that dwelleth above the heavens may only understand the things that are above the heights of the heavens. So you can't see from the example that you are stretching beyond your allotted bounds? Then answered I and said, I beseech thee, O Lord, let me have understanding. For it was not my mind to be curious of the high things, but of such as pass by us daily, namely, wherefore Israel is given us up as a reproach to the heathen, and for what cause the people whom thou hast loved is given over unto ungodly nations, and why the law of our forefathers is brought to naught, and the written covenants come to none effect. And we pass away out of the world as grasshoppers, and our life is astonishment and fear, and we are not worthy to obtain mercy. What will he then do unto his name whereby we are called? Of these things I've asked. So Esdras is kind of giving a funny answer here, and he's like, wait, just let me clarify, because I don't think we're on the same wavelength here. I wasn't trying to comprehend anything about God and higher ways, even heaven. My question is about our earthly experiences that we're going through right now. What I'm asking is, why has God's chosen people been forsaken? We can't even worship thee to even repent. We can't obey the law or gain the blessings. It's impossible for us to progress. We're in the catch-22 here. Then answered he me and said, The more thou searchest, the more thou shalt marvel, for the world hasteth fast to pass away, and cannot comprehend the things that are promised to the righteous in the time to come, for the world is full of unrighteousness and infirmities. But as concerning the things whereof thou askest me, I will tell thee, for the evil is sown, but the destruction thereof is not yet come. If therefore that which is sown be not turned upside down, and if the place where the evil is sown pass not away, then cannot it come that is sown with good. For the grain of evil seed hath been sown in the heart of Adam from the beginning, and how much ungodliness hath it brought up unto this time, and how much shall it yet bring forth until the time of threshing come? Ponder now by thyself how great fruit of wickedness the grain of evil seed hath brought forth. And when the ears shall be cut down, which are without number, how great a floor shall they fill? So he's saying, the more you think about this, you're going to be amazed, because the world's time is coming to a close. The world cannot comprehend the future blessings that are in store, because the world is full of unrighteousness blocking their view. I will answer your question, because the evilness has started, but it hasn't reached its peak. The seed of evil must be turned upside down, and the place where it's sown must be tilled up for it to be sown with good. The evil seed has been sown in the heart of Adam from the beginning. How much evil has been brought forth, and how much is yet to come? Then I answered and said, How and when shall these things come to pass? Wherefore are our years few and evil? He's saying, this all sounds too big for our lifespans. Are we not ever going to see good times again? And he answered me, saying, Do not hasten above the Most Highest, for thy haste is in vain to be above him, for thou hast much exceeded. Did not the souls also of the righteous ask questions of these things in their chambers, saying, How long shall I hope on this fashion? When cometh the fruit of the floor of our reward? And unto these things Uriel the archangel gave them answer, and said, Even when the number of seeds is filled in you, for he hath weighed the world in the balance. By measure hath he measured the times, and by number hath he numbered the times. And he doth not move nor stir them, until the said measure be fulfilled. He's saying, slow down, you're going too fast again. Don't think you're the only person that's asked me these kind of questions. Good and evil must be balanced in all aspects by the end. Which is an interesting concept. If we're thinking about that, really ponder on that. The good must equal the evil. There can't be more good than evil, and there can't be more evil than good. At the end of all things, the balance must reach an equilibrium, which is a very interesting concept that we'll talk about later. Then answered I and said, O Lord that bearest rule, even we are full of impiety, and for our sakes peradventure is that the floors of the righteous are not filled because of the sins of them that dwell upon the earth. He's saying, aren't we already there? Can it actually get any worse? There's no way that sin is equal to the righteous, because we're seeing so much sin. He answered me and said, Go thy way to a woman with child, and ask her when she hath fulfilled her 9 months, if her womb may keep the birth any longer within her. So can a pregnant woman keep the baby in her womb just by sheer willpower past the 9 months? Then said I, No, Lord, she cannot. And he said unto me, In the grave the chambers of souls are like the womb of a woman. For like as the woman that travaileth maketh haste to escape the necessity of the travail, even so these places haste to deliver those things that are committed unto them. From the beginning, look, what thou desirest to see, it shall be showed thee. So the graves are like a woman's womb, quickly needing to deliver up their gifts, the things that are entrusted to them. So let's go back to the beginning. What did you want to see again? I'll show it to you. Then answered I and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, and if it be possible, and if I be meet therefore, show me then whether there be more to come than is past, or more past than is to come. What is past I know, but what is to come I know not. So he actually is kind of getting a fairly humble response here. He's like, okay, so only show me if I'm ready, but what I really want to know is where I fit on the timeline. Is there more past or future? I know what's past, I know the history, but I don't know the future. How much more is there to come? And he said unto me, Stand up upon the right side, and I shall expound the similitude unto thee. So I stood and saw, and behold, an hot burning oven passed by before me. And it happened that when the flame was gone by, I looked, and behold, the smoke remained still. After this there passed by before me a watery cloud, and sent down much rain with a storm. And when the stormy rain was past, the drops remained still. Then said he unto me, Consider with thyself, as the rain is more than the drops, and as fire is greater than the smoke, but the drops and the smoke remain behind, so the quantity that which is past did more exceed. So basically all of that can be summarized, you're past the halfway mark. Then I prayed and said, May I live, thinkest thou, until that time? Or what shall happen in those days? He answered me and said, As for the tokens whereof thou askest me, I may tell thee of them in part, but as touching thy life, I am not sent to show thee, for I do not know it. Nevertheless, as coming the tokens, behold, the days shall come, that they which dwell upon the earth shall be taken in a great number, and the way of truth shall be hidden, and the land shall be barren of faith. But iniquity shall be increased above that which thou now seest, or that thou hast heard long ago, and the land that thou seest not now to have root, shalt thou see wasted suddenly. But if the Most High grant thee to live, thou shalt see after the third trumpet that the sun shall suddenly shine again in the night, and the moon thrice in a day. And blood shall drop out of wood, and the stone shall give his voice, and the people shall be troubled. So he's saying, I know the general future, but not specifically yours. There's going to be much death, apostasy, no faith, great iniquity, than the current past, than is current or past. There's going to be famine. And if you live long enough, you'll see the third trumpet and the sun shining, even in the night, and the moon in the day. There's going to be the blood sap, earthquakes, and tribulations. And even he shall rule, whom they look not for, and dwell upon the earth, and the fowls shall take their flight away together. And the Sodomite sea shall cast out fish, and make a noise in the night, which many have not known, but they shall all hear the voice thereof. There shall be a confusion also in many places, and the fire shall oft be sent out again. And the wild beasts shall change their places, and menstruous women shall bring forth monsters. And salt water shall be found in the sweet, and all friends shall destroy one another. Then shall wit hide itself, and understanding withdraw itself into its secret chamber. So, unexpected rulers, bird migrations, Dead Sea is uninhabitable. There's going to be a voice in the sea, confusion, fires, nomadic beasts, infertility, oceans mixing with fresh water, civil war, and no common sense. And shall be sought of many, and yet not be found. Then shall unrighteousness and incontinency be multiplied upon the earth. One land also shall ask another, and say, Is righteousness that maketh a man righteous gone through thee? And it shall say, No. At the same time shall men hope, but obtain nothing. They that shall labor, but their ways shall not prosper. To shew thee tokens I have leave. And if thou wilt pray again, and fast even days, thou shalt hear yet greater things. Then I awaked, and an extreme fearfulness went through all of my body, and my mind was troubled, so that it fainted. So the angel that was come to talk with me held me, comforted me, and set me upon my feet. All right, so who is Uriel? Now, I have lots of different sources here and there on why I'm thinking what I'm thinking. But this is opinion. I want to make that perfectly clear. My sources aren't super authoritative as far as they're not canonized. They're not in the institute manuals necessarily. So here's what I'm going on. And my first clue to this was I was trying to match up the 7 archangels to the 7 heads of the dispensations and seeing if there was a correlation. And it seems like there is. So here's where I'm at. In the Bible dictionary, it says that there have been many gospel dispensations since the beginning. The Bible suggests at least one dispensation identified with Adam, another with Enoch, another with Noah, and so on with Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and his apostles in the meridian of time. The fullness of times is the final dispensation and began with a revelation of the gospel to Joseph Smith. There's lots of other apocryphal sources to take this from, and none of them list out the 7 in its completeness, except for the book of Enoch. So there's a couple different places in Enoch that reference it, but here's the one that, for wholeness sake here, in 4th Enoch chapter 8, it says, There are 7 archangels who preside under the Godhead over all the affairs of mankind. Now note all of these, their order, and what their responsibility is. I think that's very interesting. The first is Michael, who stands at the head of all humanity. He was the first of mankind, and from him have proceeded all nations. He is the Lord of spirits, the Ancient of Days, the exalted man who creates order from chaos and light from darkness. The second is Raphael, who presides over the world of spirits, where dwell the dead, who have not been resurrected. He holds keys of death and life, of healing power, of health and strength. The third is Gabriel, who presides over the dispensations of the priesthood. He watches over the cherubim, the seraphim, and the serpents who inherit the light of the firstborn. The fourth is Raguel, who presides over those who have been lifted to worlds of light. He is the father of the faithful multitude and the prototype of the way of life that leads to unity with God. The fifth is Uriel, who reaches out to those who stumble in the path of life, leading them to a place of rest where they can be strengthened before continuing their journey. The sixth is Sarakiel or Phanuel, who saves the penitent from darkness so that they can live among God in realms of light. The seventh is Remuel, who will lead mankind to the resurrection, preparing everything for the descent of the Son of Man in radiant light. He is the testator, who bears witness of the Father and his divine Son. Through him, everything will be restored before the end of time. All right, so here's where I'm coming up with it. I was trying to match the 7 dispensation heads to the 7 archangels. Now, here we have them in order in both of these sources. The arrows represent things that we actually do know. We do know that Adam is Michael. We believe that Enoch is Raphael, and McConkie is the best quotable source for that in a few different places. That's one of them in the Ensign, April 1980. Noah, We do know from modern revelation that Noah is Gabriel. So if the three first ones match up, what's to say that the other four don't? Now, going back, we have Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Joseph Smith. So let's read their descriptions here, starting with the last one. The seventh is Remuel, going to be a testator. He bears witness of the Father and his divine Son with the first vision. Through him, everything will be restored before the end of time. Seems to fit. The sixth is Sarakiel or Phanuel, saves the penitent from darkness so that they can live among God in realms of light. John the Baptist is my best guess at this, meaning baptism. It saves the men from darkness so that they can live among God in realms of light, like it's saving ordinance. The fifth is Uriel, those who stumble along the path of life. The Israelites definitely stumbled along the path of life. He leads them to a place of rest. Moses tends to lead people, especially as a translated being. The fourth is Ragel, and he is the friend of God, which Abraham definitely is. Father of a faithful multitude, prototype of the way of life that leads to unity with God. So that's where you have my opinions. But again, they're just my opinions, and of course I'm pulling from apocryphal text of Enoch, and who knows if that's the actual way and order and everything that they're supposed to be. So here's the slide where I list up the 7 dispensation heads and with their names. Take it for what it's worth. It's interesting that most oftentimes when a prophet is being tutored, he's being tutored by the angel or angels that have previously went through that specific thing before. Now here with Ezra, if we look back at his life, we know that he is going to be writing lots of material, writing lots of books, and that he will be leading a group of captives back to their promised land. It sounds a lot like Moses. If we're going to assume any of the archangels are this Uriel, that seems to fit hand in glove, is what I'm saying. But again, take it for what it's worth. The next lesson we will be diving into visions 2 and 3 together, and really kind of doing the same thing, putting them in a modern vernacular and seeing the progress of Esdras as he communicates with Uriel.